Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. It's great to have you. My name is Amy Antonucci, and I'm here to welcome you to New Hampshire Peace Action's Peace and Justice Conversation Series online for May 20th, 2024. Tonight, we're bringing you Cathy Hoffman to talk about the Freedom Flotilla to Gaza 2024 and also nonviolence more generally, probably. We'll see what she's got for us. For over 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more peaceful and just future for all, one based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict. In that spirit of respect, we do want to start with an acknowledgement that we are doing our work on Yidakina, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples. We honor with gratitude the land, the water, and those people who have been in relationship throughout the generations. Quick reminder about our Zoom guidelines. We'd love for you to have your video on. Your audio will be muted for now. You can go ahead and use the chat throughout. Put in comments and especially questions. Later on, we'll do hand raising and people can unmute and ask and speak directly to Cathy. But first, we'll hear from her and then we'll get into that part. So tonight we are really excited to welcome Cathy Hoffman. Cathy is an activist from down in Massachusetts who has been part of liberation movements for social justice, against militarism and US interventionism for decades, and a nonviolent direct action participant and trainer for more than 40 years. Cathy was recently part of the nonviolence training team for the 2024 Gaza Flotilla, the largest attempted flotilla since the Mavi Marmara in 2010, in which Israeli forces killed 10 of those on the ship. So she's going to talk to us, as I said, about nonviolence and about the flotilla, and from there we'll move into Q&A. So please join me in welcoming Cathy. Thanks for being here, Cathy.
I am so excited to be here. And I'm also going to be doing like screen sharing. So I hope that that does not make everyone crazy, or including myself. But let's see how we do this. First, we find our thing. Now, do you see that?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay. Can't get out of here. Can't get out of here at all.
I will have it queued up in case you need me to help. There you go.
Okay, and now what did you say? View?
Yeah.
Like that.
Yes, you got it.
All right. I'm always interested in adding my own acknowledgements as well. I'm coming from Massachusetts territory next to Wampanoags, and for me, land acknowledgements are always a way of acknowledging the earth beneath our feet and the people who were on this earth before colonial peoples like my own ancestors arrived to make hell for people. But for me, acknowledgement is also an opportunity for all of us with our own different histories to recondition the future, to not be determined by the ways in which we've been conditioned by our society, but to recondition it for the future. So I wanted to begin with a poem, and it's a poem by William Stafford. And it says, the way it is, there's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you can do stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. So for me, nonviolence is the thread. And one of the threads of nonviolence is gratitude. And so I want to begin with gratitude for New Hampshire Peace Action. And this series, which has long roots in my heart because of my abiding friendship with LR, who was one of my nonviolence teachers formally decades ago and informally ever since. I attended several of what were called forums in New Hampshire, which may be part of the genesis of this series. And I wouldn't have been invited but for that friendship. To have the chance to share some of my recent experiences in Istanbul as a nonviolence trainer for the Freedom Flotilla is both a joy and a responsibility, especially in these devastating times of harm to human lives, to cultures, and to the truth. I also just returned from 2 days in New York City, training third actors, climate justice activists over the age of 60. So preparing this presentation has been an enlightening reflection on contrast. My plan is to take you quickly through a little of the purpose and history of the flotilla, then share some of my time as an insider to the 2024 effort, and end with some comments about nonviolence. I hope I keep it within the time, but I'm notoriously for not doing that. So here we go. As you can see, the Freedom Flotilla is a grassroots, people-to-people solidarity movement composed of campaigns and initiatives from different parts of the world, working together to end the illegal blockade of Gaza. And I'll show these things, but I'm not going to read all of these things. Some of the goals: to break Israel's illegal and inhumane blockade of the Gaza Strip, which has been in effect for decades, to educate people around the world about the blockade, the unlivable conditions it enforces, and the fact that this colossal human suffering is not natural. An international effort to show the people in Gaza that people support their struggle for freedom and dignity, and to respond to the cry from Palestinians and Palestinian organizations for solidarity. A little bit about the history. It was founded in 2006 by 3 California peace activists who had previously worked for Palestinian human rights and been detained or deported by Israel as the Free Gaza movement. The first sailing took place in August 2008. 2 of the boats arrived in Gaza carrying peace activists, including 4 Israeli citizens. The second, in October 2008, arrived in Gaza with activists and medical supplies. In total, 5 shipments got through. Following, however, the 2008-2009 Gaza war, or perhaps war on Gaza, subsequent sailings were thwarted by Israel. Some of the boats were actually rammed. Others were commandeered and taken to Israel. People were arrested, imprisoned for more than a week, and deported. So one particular thing which has the greatest relevance for my time: in 2010, the Turkish Foundation for Human Rights and Freedoms and Humanitarian Relief, IHH, or as we learned in Turkey, pronounced İHA, which is the 3rd largest humanitarian organization in the world, labeled by Israel as terrorists, sponsored a vessel called the Mavi Marmara. And here it is. And in international waters, Israel seized and boarded the Mavi Marmara from the ocean in boats and from helicopters, helicoptering down, killing 10 of the passengers, and commandeered the boat to Israel, where the remaining passengers were jailed. In subsequent years, other smaller flotillas attempted to carry aid to Gaza, including a women's flotilla seen here, but none were successful in getting to Gaza. I think if you remember back to the goals, though, it's also important to understand that getting there was not the only measure of success in terms of the organizing behind the effort. In the wake of Israel's escalated response to the attacks of October 7th and the devastating ongoing circumstances in Gaza, the Freedom Flotilla organization chose to send another flotilla, including, you'll see here, an 8-decked ship the size of the Mavi Marmara. So this is from Turkey. And the organization, I weep when I say this, Friends of Mavi Marmara, which was made up of relatives of those who were killed on the boat, raised funds from 4 million people to buy this boat and the other 2 boats that would sail. And the IHH was a primary supporter in terms of the aid. So all of this is the background bringing me to Istanbul. So just a minute about it. Plans obviously had been made in the late fall, pulled together, people applying to go on the boat. And several weeks before it was due to go, my friend Lisa Fithian was invited to come and do the nonviolence training for the passengers. Lisa is a beloved friend of mine since 1987, where we were Pledge of Resistance people together. But she's gone on to be like a huge national and international activist, everything from helping stop the WTO and that famous Seattle, Washington thing to jobs, justice for janitors, lots of different efforts, including a number of international settings. So it wasn't new to her to be part of it. And she was actually part of the women's flotilla and perhaps even another one. So 3 days before the training was to start, I get a call from Lisa saying, do you want to come to Istanbul and be part of this training team? And partly, as my friend, my beloved partner, Betty says, you know, most of organizing happens in activism because you've been invited, which is always a reminder to invite people. So I said yes, got permission from the people trying to stop private jet expansion, not to be at their action, and got on the plane to Istanbul. So the next slide, and this is Ann Wright and some of the people from on the international coordinating team for the flotilla here at a press conference. So I want to actually organize the next little section based on the agenda that we came up with. And I was sort of having fun balancing this agenda with the one that I just used in New York City. So, so the first thing that we do in an agenda is we introduce the training team. But in this case, rather than it just being like one other person or whatever, we had a wonderful collection of people. On the left, far left, is Elliot, who's from the West Coast, and he was actually the only member of the training team going on the flotilla. I'm next to him with my Break the Siege t-shirt. Jamila Rakib, who maybe some of you know, she's the director of the Albert Einstein Institute. She was recruited a day after I was. Cindy Spoon is a nonviolence trainer who's most recently been working with Cop City in Atlanta, and Karam, who is a Palestinian man who has been on past flotillas and has had some of the most sort of trauma-inducing experiences with Israeli force. So then, in a regular training, you introduce the participants. Well, you can't really see this, but it just gives you a sense of who was there. And in this case, and so actually you can see it a little bit louder. But in this case, introducing the participants, half of the 600 participants were internationalists. And you can see from places like Ireland, Germany, Greece, Belgium, etc. And half were Turkish people. And everyone had to apply and be sponsored or vetted by an organization. And in Turkey, for the 300 spots that they had, 9,000 Turkish people applied to be on the boat. Again, everywhere you go in Istanbul, there's symbols of the Mavi Marmara all around, painted on the walls, like the one in the picture of me in the very beginning. It is a mainstream relationship with Palestine, and particularly over the boat. This is just one picture of some of the fierce, small, wonderful women from Malaysia, all of them Muslim, as probably majority of people on the delegation, were. So then, just back to here. So then Huwaid Araf, who's a Palestinian woman, one of the founders of the International Solidarity Movement, gave a little update on the coalition. We might do this a little bit on sort of what's happening, where are we doing it? But this update included a sort of situation with the boats, already the incredible threats to the potential for the boats to go, issues about security, issues about people's medical conditions. And then the next section was, what are we facing? Israeli violence. And in this situation, they showed a short video of the boarding of the Mavi Marmara, complete with percussion grenades going off, machine guns fire, people being beaten, absolutely all in, pitch black at night, and in no uncertain terms, making clear that there's a long history of this, and that the people who boarded the Mavi Marmara, as they were to board future boats after that, are all part of an elite commando unit. This is not sort of random, even day-to-day IDF forces. This is a very strategic group. So having seen that, we did a little bit about a grounding exercise, and when we do this in our own trainings, we breathe, we touch the ground, right? We connect. But Lisa chose to do a particular activity highlighting notions of fear and what's in our body around fear, what's in our body about anger, and what's in our body about mobilizing the power of love, as something a little bit more in keeping with what people were facing. We then did our own section about power of nonviolence. I'll come back to that. A piece about affinity groups. I can say more about that in a minute too, but affinity groups for this particular venture were required and utterly essential for having smaller groups of people, same language. We had all of our trainings were translated into Spanish, into Arabic, into Turkish. And so you wanted a smaller unit of people that you were going to be on this boat with, who shared your language, also knew what it was going to involve for you being confronted with people. And also people were assigned to different places on the boat where they would go in the event of an attack. And it was a chain of command that people followed. Then we did a scenario simulation. In our regular trainings, those of you who know, well, maybe blockade, a fake blockade of a building, people experience risking arrest. To get a feel for that, taken away. Well, this wasn't that. This was a full-on replication of what happened. Announcement came over the loudspeaker, the lights went off, get to your areas. All the different affinity groups came and pooled in the middle of the room, and in came a full commando unit of people, threatening, I'm going to shoot you, I'm going to hurt you, and just carrying on in the dark for about 10 minutes, being incredibly, incredibly frightening. I'll mention in a moment just because it's relevant later, but one of the commandos was an IHH staff person who had a paintball team. And he said, I can bring my paintball folks with me and we can use our guns, our fake guns. And the people from IHH were very clear. There will be absolutely nothing that looks like a weapon in this training, because any image that is used by Israel to show people with guns will be used to promote the fact that this was a terrorist training. So we didn't, but it was incredibly frightening. And after that, we did some stuff about protective tactics, and then Huwaida did illegal information. And again, regular trainings, it's sort of like what happens when you're arrested, what are the charges, etc. This is not that legal. This is illegal information with a role play about interrogation. What it means when you're taken, the boat is commandeered, you're taken to Israel, people are in handcuffs, they're taken into prison, and then they're subject to incredible interrogation, and how to answer that and how not to answer that, and then actually role playing it so people felt like they could do something about it. And then some work about collective care, trauma, and resilience. Again, in this context, being ever so mindful that many of the people participating in this flotilla were people dealing with incredible issues about trauma. And then we closed. Phew. So here's the question. How do you offer nonviolence requisites to a multicultural group of people, some of whom have family killed by Israelis, including relatives of people on the Mavi Marmara, and all impacted by the Israeli surveillance and military state? How do you offer training for some people coming for whom non-resistance feels like cowardice, culturally, gender-wise, or specifically? That was our task. And some of it is because many of our images of nonviolence look like this. And many of us here and in my trainings use images that look like this. But here we're in a different context, inviting many strategies and only a few principles. So how do we adapt? Continuously. First of all, in advance, there was incredible vetting. Each campaign, I was telling you, people were vetted. Anyone with any history of violence, not allowed to come. Anyone with any potential affiliation with a violent group, like Hamas, for instance, absolutely not allowed on this. Anybody who had a history of perhaps feeling a little bit unable to stay calm, not allowed. And if people were not vetted, they were not allowed to come. And if you came, which happened actually with several people, and it turned out that you actually had some of those affiliations or history, you were asked kindly to leave. This principles of nonviolence were laid out before people came on the flotilla. Things like not using protective measures, to protect the wheelhouse, which they had done with the Mavi Marmara, not to give the commandos the opportunity of looking humane by non-cooperation, no action towards commandos with any intent to harm, using nonviolent techniques such as singing, affinity groups going to their designated locations, nobody in their rooms, nobody on deck was one of the clear rules for this ship because of what had happened before with everyone on the deck that had been killed. And participants will respect their roles, stay with their affinity groups, and follow direction of leadership and crews. In our training, we reiterated this with what were called red lines. And you can see them: no physical contact, no throwing objects, no starting fires, no using fire extinguishers, no use or display of objects that could be construed as weapons, no jumping off the boat into the water, because someone did on one of the flotillas, thinking that that would be a good distraction, as opposed to, in fact, getting people almost killed as a result. So that was a second piece of it. So advanced vetting, signed statement, agreeing to guidelines here, using the scenario to both practice what it would take and also to debrief. In one situation, in terms of the practice, we asked for a woman to fake a panic attack, as well as also asking someone else to fake resisting the commandos. And this woman had a panic attack that was so realistic that her affinity group member grabbed her, took her out of the room where we were training outside and said, "You cannot go on this boat." She was like, no, I was just faking this for the sake of it. But we debriefed it. And some of the men who stood up when the commandos came in, because they couldn't bear to sit in non-resistance, were made clear by the commandos themselves what kind of behavior that would have elicited. There were detailed plans aboard ship for where to go. As I mentioned before, the affinity group structure, which was critical, and this chain of command from captain to crew to security team to affinity group. And this is a lot of peace activists and social justice activists. So you know that hierarchy is not necessarily people's most comfortable mode of operation. A reminder about the mission and narrative. And again, this sense that not wanting any way in which this group committed to practicing nonviolent mission was going to be able to be construed by Israel as a violent force. And then how we talked about it, and I'll say more about that in a second. All right. So we had a little section on nonviolence, and I do a lot of that. LR and I, you know how we do this work. Well, here's how we had to change it. Part of it was foregoing the Kingian principles, MLK's principles, with decidedly Christian faith US roots in things like sacrifice, notion of shared humanity, and moral persuasion, where moral persuasion in this case has had no impact. Jamila offered Gene Sharp's framework, which isn't about nonviolence so much as about non-cooperation, using at one point the language of defiance as a way of making change. Well, watching how that was received and sort of reinforcing certain things, we changed it to self-defense because non-cooperation seemed too close to resistance. And then finally, Lisa offered us the language of self-protection, so that when the boat was boarded, in the face of violence, people could protect each other, they could protect themselves, they could move in different ways, but it was a very different posture than that of resistance. For me, it was giving up my own standard and deeply held cultural critique of violence as rooted in US history, in our history and in our all forms. and making only some reference to gender and to the violence of the opponent. And finally, we talked about embodying the international beautiful community of solidarity, not just the suffering of Palestinians, but the beauty of them. Ultimately, with Israeli and US and UK pressure, the boats did not go. They're taking applications again. The ship was to fly under the Guinea-Bissau flag, and the day it was supposed to sail, Guinea-Bissau pulled the right to go under the flag, which would have taken another week. And so people had already overstayed their time, and that was it. So I want to end this these remarks with some of the reasons about beyond strategy why I feel like living into nonviolence has been an incredibly important guide for me, thread. One, recognizing the humanity and beauty which lives in all beings is an antidote to the conditioning, both visible and invisible, of human, white, European, male supremacy. It's not just about racism, it is about that sense of superiority over different groups, over the earth, which has been the destruction of the ability to live together. Defeating injustice over people builds connection and recognizes we are both victims and aggressors in different ways. It invites transformation, building vision and muscles for the world we want to create and live in, not simply a power shift or rearranging of the chairs. And finally, creating beloved community over fear and individualism is the best. I want to close with the same poem we used in New York City as a way of linking our struggles and commonalities, and because it's one of LR's favorites, even though it's not one of the ones that she wrote. And that is a poem called Paul Robeson by Gwendolyn Brooks. Paul Robeson, the great activist, singer, actor, whose passport was taken away by the United States for his activism. And here's the poem. That time, cool and clear, cutting across the hot grit of the day, the major voice, the adult voice, foregoing rolling river, foregoing tearful tale of bale and barge, and other symptoms of an old despond, warning in music words devout and large. How does it end, LR? That we are each other's harvest, that we are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude and bond. Thank you. Whew.
Thank you, Cathy. Wow, that was wonderful. And you wrapped it up with plenty of time for conversation. So that's what we're going to go to next. The chat is open for questions. Also, people can raise your digital hand, especially. That is the easiest way for me to see you. And then I can let people unmute. There's already a question in chat. So let's start with that one. Did Israel keep the first huge boat, the first
Mavi Marmara.
Yeah, from Turkey that they took?
What I think happened was actually eventually it went somewhere else, but a number of the other boats Israel did keep, and they also often ended up keeping the aid. And it's interesting because this disappointment right now about the boats not being able to go, the only good side at the moment is we still have the boats and we still have the 5,000 tons of aid, including 6 ambulances and a fire truck were part of what were going on this ship. IHH has been trying to get aid and has been getting aid into Gaza in different ways. So I think some of the aid will get there. But some, yes, they've destroyed some of the boats, they've kept some of the boats, and some have been able to later on be moved to another place.
I wanted to ask, was there anyone, maybe when you had the list of the international different countries that people were coming from, was there anyone from the US?
Yeah, there were. Let me just take a look back here a second. Yeah, there were quite a few from the US. Probably the largest contingents were from there was a huge contingent from Spain, from the UK, Ireland. Ireland has an incredible relationship with the people of Palestine. And the US. And as I say, Anne Wright, who many of you probably know, is a peace activist. She used to be a colonel in the US military until Iraq, and has become part of Code Pink and other efforts since. She's one of the national sort of co-chairs of it.
Great, thanks. So LR has a question.
I know, I see that.
So I'm going to read it out loud for folks. Catherine, please explain what you mean by protective measures as tactical agreements. Also, please say something more about getting there not being the only goal.
Part of it is that this notion of protective measures, everybody understood the history of these flotillas, that the Mavi Marmara, where 10 people were killed, was the most dramatic. But the boats after that, people were arrested, people were detained, people were hurt. And so the sense of these guidelines, these practicing, anything we could think of to help people not be caught in this desire to resist. And you felt it over and over again. For some people, it was sort of cultural traditions. No, we do not just passively let the Israelis hurt us. And one of the things that was really important that Hueda talked about is so tactically, to absolutely be non-resistant, it was really important so that when Israel came on, both so that people would hopefully not be killed, but also so that there wouldn't be imagery of people fighting back. At the same time, she was also really clear that once people were arrested and taken off the boat, as they were taken off, they were to be as sort of resolute as possible. I guess on one of the boats, Merid Maguire, you know, the Irish peace winner, Nobel Peace Prize winner, was taken off in handcuffs and was sort of smiling. And so it was really important not to give the impression, because it wasn't true, that somehow the Israelis were treating people humanely. But all of these things, I mean, everything we could think of to invite people to see how powerful, what an incredible statement of resistance and justice they were making simply by being a part of this flotilla. And I think part of that, about not being the only goal, was that part of this is about, Lisa was saying, you know, she sees the flotillas as creating a crisis in legitimacy, a crisis in Israel's policies, because all the boats they've commandeered in international waters. And in fact, the week before the boat was supposed to go, the United Nations issued a statement saying the boat should go and had the right to do it. So part of it is to, keep that contrast between and keep the focus on what's happening to Palestinians and building this international movement. And so having the boat leave and getting aid there was a piece of it, but not the only piece of it.
Yeah, got it. That makes sense.
Does that answer what you were thinking, LR? Yeah. I'm sure.
LR also was interested in if you could share a link or information on how to apply for the next flotilla.
So if you go to Freedom Flotilla to Gaza, something like that, you click on their website, you'll see that there's a place of taking applications. It was just, having to be in this environment of waiting, anticipating, and also this incredible international array of folks. It was like so many different pieces to try and hold. We went to a massive demonstration, which they have like weekly, and there were 15,000 people. And in the crowd, there were some green Hamas flags. And our people were like, there will be no images that hold that up. And one of the people going on the flotilla was spotted with a Hamas headband. He was taken aside, talked to, and told, you can't go on this flotilla. That is not what this is about. This is about being in support of the humanitarian, a nonviolent mission for the Palestinian people. But it was like at every step of the way, while we were there, representatives from the UK, from Israel, and the US, no, not Israel, the UK, Germany, and the US came to meet with the president of Turkey, not exactly your democratic guy, to ask him not to allow the boat to leave. So the sense of it back and forth. Oh, good, someone's put it in there. How would you suggest US activists, including students, change their tactics so they're similar to yours? Well, I guess part of my first answer is they are using tactics similar to ours. And again, Brian Stevenson, who was the founder of Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, started out as a sort of using the law to deal with racism. And what he came to understand was, it doesn't matter if you change the laws if you don't change the narrative. Because a 13-year-old young Black man who's been arrested, where it's illegal to sentence that person to a death penalty, will be seen as a criminal in a racist society. And so this sense about capturing the narrative is strategically really important. I've been a part of the support for the MIT students, the Harvard students, et cetera. And this narrative of both anti-Semitism and violence is not true. They are being subject to not police violence here, but in other places, the violence is coming from outside. And, a majority or vast numbers of these students are, young Jewish students who feel like for them, their values as Jews is part of why they're supporting an end to the siege on Gaza and calling for a ceasefire. So I think in this country, for me, I also draw on so much of our legacy as being born out of violence, between theft of land, genocide of Native peoples, the enslavement and cruelty and torture of Black people. this is in our DNA. And so if we want to create the world yet to be, as Vincent Harding and Langston Hughes say, we have to reorient ourselves. And we have to proactively build something different. And I feel like, I've been part of movements where faith and conscience have created communities that really are transformative. And I've been part of movements where they haven't. And those movements looked an awful lot like the society that we were trying to change. And also they fell apart because our own capacity for division and hostility towards each other. So.
Yeah, thanks, Cathy. That's a really, really good point. In a way, this is extremely radical change in the sense of radical as getting to the root of something, truly trying to change the system, not just who the different people are at the top or bottom. Oh, go ahead.
No. And, Audre Lorde sort of says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. So it's not just that we need a different vision, but even the way that we go about it. If we replicate power over, we're going to get power over. So.
Right.
Would
you say a little more? And I actually wanted to start by saying I'm currently taking a class with Rivera Sun. You probably know her, Cathy.
Sure.
Yeah, and today's was partly about the narrative, and we watched footage from various nonviolent, massive change being implemented by people's movements, and then paid attention to what the commentators were saying. So, the people were saying, we are here for peace. And they were saying during this mutiny, they were adding their own commentary that kept it in a certain narrative. So LR and I are asking if you can say more about changing, how we can change the narrative.
So can you see this now? I'm just bringing back up these images for a moment as a way to save on words, perhaps. Because if you look at these folks who sat in Jackson, Mississippi in the lunch counters, or Dorothy Day surrounded by 4 police officers with the farm workers, or AIDS activists dying in New York, or water protectors redefining not being protesters, but protectors at Standing Rock, and Mountain Valley Pipeline elders. It's like, this is the changed narrative that we're talking about. The sense of creating in our movements, but in our lives, messages that are about joyfully embracing our own communities, our own identities in the face of oppression, and also kind of replacing violence with beloved community. So I guess that's part of it. And I mean, as LR knows well, that some of also how we change the narrative is through the arts, through poetry, I mean, through dance, I mean, through movement. We change the narrative by embodying with our words and our bodies different ways of being, I think. Hello, George Friday. I see your hand up. Can you unmute, George?
Yeah, there.
I'm unmuted now.
Oh,
Hey,
beautiful.
good to see you and hear from you.
You too.
Been ages, but you mentioned how how destructive racism is and oppression, and most people in this movement don't get it. They think they can read a book and they're enlightened, or see a movie and it's all done. And when I work with people, I say that it's the rest of your life. And you know that. So in terms of the kind of skills people can learn to be anti-racist, basically practice anti-racism and live it, it takes consistency, it takes honesty and accountability. But in your journey, in your work, how have you kept at it? Kept strong, because it's not easy. So how do you do it?
Well, I think, yeah, it isn't. And, you and I go back enough to remember that the early strategies for challenging racism was sort of to put white people up against the wall and call us racist and like start as the starting point. And part of what I think that missed, first of all, it led to a fair amount of defensiveness, which, that can be all right. But it also really underestimated, I think, what I call conditioning, the ways in which we have been conditioned so powerfully around racial superiority and other kinds of superiority. And so part of it is, how do we keep finding opportunities? And, reading is certainly one of them, but being in action settings and being in other settings in which we are constantly kind of taking our own inventory and being in coalition, centering different voices of those most impacted, but also building movements that don't replicate that same kind of superiority about who's ignorant and who's not. Because to me, sometimes in the name of anti-racism or anti-sexism or anti-homophobia, we are actually exercising our own superiority. Like, I'm woke now, and obviously you're not. And so, I don't know. George, we do it by also being surrounded by people that we love, having them remind us that we are lovable and loving and capable of evolving. What else do we do? You know these things. I'm sure people put them in the chat, folks who are on this call, because this isn't just, I certainly, I come out of a colonial past. Really, those people, colonial past. And so, one of the things that's so interesting, Louise Dunlap in her book wrote about, in terms of the early colonists, Puritans, which is what I'm descended from. They were prohibited from grieving. It was not allowed. And when you think about, or when I think about WASP culture, my own background, in which that sense of being cut off from our feelings, being head oriented, but heart, with deficit, it's like, how do we restore our own souls so that in this partnership with other peoples, we can bring a different kind of being than the more rigid ways in which unloving ways in which we've been raised. So
you also said that you have to change. If you want a changed future, you have to change now. And I wonder if people have the real capacity to change drastically. Thank you for being here. I've got to go to a 7:00 Zoom.
Thank you,
but
George.
I wanted to say hi, and I wanted to spread the word as much as possible among people of European descent that white supremacy can be dismantled. And you do it, every day. It's just it's not, I don't know.
Yep.
It's not a burden if you incorporate it in your life and you have relationships with people of color, real relationships. Okay, good. Thank
you,
you.
dear one.
Yes.
Doug Whitbeck, I'm awed by the amount of self-awareness and self-control required to conform to that list of standards. Oh, Doug, where are you?
And let me just warn you, Cathy, we only have a few minutes,
yeah.
so go ahead and speak to that, but
Well, part of it, Douglas, we have to make this work joyful and invitational. And some of it is about releasing a kind of self-control, that rigorous, life-denying self-control that really separates us from each other, and cultivate the fact that we are, in fact, not separate from each other. I grew up with an incredible love of the ocean and like that. But I was not raised with an understanding of love for the earth, let alone Robin Wall Kimmerer's information that the earth loves us. We are beloved. And so some of it is, how do we wrap ourselves around a tree or find ourselves in conversation in ways that helps us unlock our non-separation, so that self-awareness becomes like, oh, I didn't realize that. I never understood that WASPs have culture. I learned this in college. When someone was talking about WASP culture, I was like, oh, that's me. I was so thrilled because, sometimes you think the things that are true are just the way you are. And the women's movement gave us consciousness raising in this fantastic bonding way. So I think there are ways to do it. And granted, it often cannot be so easy or pleasant, but other times I think what we're cultivating is when it is. So we have 3 minutes left, and New Hampshire Peace Action is planning some great things.
yeah, I'm gonna say some things. Thank you, Cathy. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who contributed. So much was shared tonight, and obviously so much is left to share on these topics, but this was a really excellent step, let's say. So I want to let you all know a few things. Stay in touch with New Hampshire Peace Action at nhpeaceaction.org. We're also on Facebook, where you can learn about what we're working on and what programming we have coming up. Here is a little bit of a taste of what we have. Now, if you're in New Hampshire, which I know not all of you are, but let's start there. We have these in-person things happening. We have been holding Ceasefire Now vigils for peace, calling for a permanent ceasefire, an end to U.S. military aid to Israel, and increased humanitarian assistance for Gaza. This week's, on a little farther out schedule, Wednesday, May 22nd, 2 to 3 p.m., there's a vigil at Representative Pappas's Dover office at 660 Central Ave. Then Thursday, May 23rd, noon to 1, there is a Concord vigil. I believe it's being held now at the corner of North Main and Center Street. Then the following week, Wednesday, May 29th, 2 to 3, will be at Senator Shaheen's Dover office, 340 Central Ave. Also coming up in person, we would just love to see you, if you are nearby, for our New Hampshire Peace Action annual meeting on June 9th, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. That's at Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. There'll be some business, there'll be a potluck lunch, there'll be a program that will help us stay engaged as activists during difficult times. Our next online peace and justice conversation will be Monday, June 3rd, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and we will welcome Mel Duncan, co-founder of the Nonviolent Peace Force and an expert on unarmed civilian protection. His talk will be generally about that, but will also include his proposal for unarmed civilian protection in Gaza and the West Bank. This series is free and open to everyone. That said, it means a lot to us and is very helpful when we get your donations. nhpeaceaction.org/donate is where you can help us out with that. I also put that in the chat. Again, thank you so much, Cathy, and everyone for being here. We'll be continuing on. We have more great programs coming up after that. And we'll keep you updated. You can also go look online if you want to look ahead. But every other Monday, we'll still be here. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Amy. And how will we get the recording?
Good question. I used to have a segment about that. Where'd that go, huh? Oh, no, it is there. Okay. Our Monday night programs go up on our YouTube channel and are usually finished and rendered like by the end of the night. So it's in there. It's like YouTube channels are weird. But YouTube, if you look up New Hampshire Peace Action and then look under the live tab, not the video tab, but the live tab, all of this series pops up. And we've had wonderful people, including George, who checked in with us tonight, and Ann Wright, who was in your video, your PowerPoint, and now you, Cathy. So spread the word, pass them around. Let's tell everyone all about these other ways of being in the world.
Beautiful.
Good night, everyone. Peace to you.